In Liu Changwen's car, I found a hotel access card wrapped with a strip of blue silk. He glanced at it for less than a second before, smiling and saying it probably belonged to a colleague's wife. He even called the colleague in front of me. The man on speaker laughed in easy surprise and said his wife had been looking everywhere for that exact ribbon and card.
Sleeve.
Liu Changwen ended the call, squeezed my shoulder and asked whether I was finally done overthinking. I looked at him, at the practice calm in his face, and said,
Nothing.
Because the blue silk ribbon was not something a random colleague's wife could have owned. I knew that ribbon the way a pianist knows a wrong note in a dark room. 3 months earlier, my company had designed a charity auction gift set for the Yulan Foundation dinner. 12 card sleeves, 12 hand-dyed ribbons, 12 serial numbers embroidered on the underside in silver thread. I insisted on numbering them because donors always misplaced exclusive gifts and then argued with assistants about authenticity. Ribbon number 7 had gone to Jane Yan. Zhang Yan was 24, charming, impeccably dressed, and newly attached to the family office that was reviewing Liu Changwen's urban renewal project. I knew because I had signed a release form myself. When I turned the ribbon over in my palm, in his passenger seat, the silver thread had flashed like a tiny knife. Number 7. Not a guess, not intuition, a fact. Yet he lied without blinking. Worse, he had a witness ready before I even asked a second question. That was the part that chilled me, not the ribbon, but the rehearsal. Men who make one impulsive mistake stammer. Men who prepare alibis have already chosen betrayal and only hope to manage your reaction to it. I tucked the card sleeve back where I had found it and asked him to drive. Outside the windshield, evening traffic trembled in red lines as if the whole city were holding its breath for me. Liu Changwen kept trying to make light conversation. A supplier had delayed a shipment. A contractor had embarrassed himself at lunch. A deputy director might finally sign next week. I answered where politeness required it. My voice sounded level even to me, but inside I was already walking through rooms he did not know existed. Opening doors, listening, risks, measuring exits. I had left him for 9 years. 4 in college, 5 in the city.
We had survived.
Unpaid internships, moldy apartments, his father's illness, my mother's surgery, and winters when heating cost more than groceries. I had always thought endurance was our strongest shared language. Looking back, perhaps endurance had only trained him to assume I would absorb anything without making a scene. He often joked that I was too calm to be jealous too, rational to be dramatic too, proud to beg. At the time he said it like praise. I understood later that he had filed an underusable weakness. When I got home that night, I opened the locked folder on my laptop where I kept project archives. Inside it was the Yulan Foundation inventory sheet complete with ribbon numbers and recipient names. Zhang Yan, ribbon 7. Delivery signed by her assistant, Sunny, at 8:14 p.m. on a rainy Friday. I remembered because the courier had come late and I had missed my train home. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I took a photo of the inventory sheet, the ribbon in Liu Changwen's car, and the release form and saved them to a new folder named
Weather.
I have always named painful things after.
Neutral lens.
Storm, dust, August. It helped
Me think.
weather would do for now. Over the next 3 days, I did not confront
Him.
I watched. People think intelligence is about fast conclusions, but in my experience, it is more often about refusing conclusions until the pattern stops changing. Liu Changwen became gentler, not colder. He brought fruit to my desk. He reminded me to sleep earlier. He sent me photos of the moon from construction sites in 3 different districts. Guilt makes some men tender. They begin watering the plant they are preparing to leave because they want to believe neglect was never the problem. I checked the shared expense spreadsheet we used for groceries and utilities. Nothing
Strange there.
Then I checked the old household tablet that still auto-synced. Location history from his car navigation. He had disabled full tracking months ago.
Smart.
But deleted routes leave fossils. Recent destinations, parking garages.
Voice. Search fragments.
One address appeared 4 times in 6 weeks. The address belonged to the private club, lounge in the Mingda Hotel, the same one. The Jiang family used when they did discreet business dinners. Another fossil. South. Tower. Service elevator. I searched Jiang Mian's social media, which was mostly locked down. But rich girls, raised in careful homes often leave traces. In the accounts of friends who enjoy being careless for them, one friend had posted a blurred boomerang of
Champagne glasses.
in the reflection of the mirrored wall behind them, a man in a charcoal suit was leaning down to hear. Something said near his ear. I could not see his face. I could see his watch. I had bought that watch for Liu Changwen when his first project crossed the finish line ahead of schedule. Still, reflection and ribbons were not enough. Pain wants immediacy. Evidence demands discipline. So I did what I always do when facts begin to rot beneath appearances. I built a timeline. Time, location, reimbursement claims, project meetings, photo fragments, weather, reports, traffic camera hours, even the florist receipts from a shop near the club.
Lounge.
By the end of the week, the line bent in only one direction. He was seeing Zhang Yan, and he was doing it while her family office evaluated a financing package his firm desperately wanted. Desire and ambition had braided together so tightly I could no longer tell which strand had started first. The night I finally let myself cry, it was not because he had touched another woman. It was because he had looked me in the eye and used my knowledge of him as a tool against me. We had spent nearly a decade building a vocabulary of trust. He had turned it into camouflage that was uglier than lust. It
Was strategy.
My mother called the next morning to ask whether I would come home for mid-autumn
Festival.
I said yes. She told me to bring Liu Changwen because she had already bragged to the neighbors about his mooncake.
Preferences.
I stood in my kitchen listening to her cheerful voice and understood with a clarity so cold it felt merciful that I would not be bringing him anywhere that required introductions ever again. I work as a strategic risk designer for a cultural infrastructure firm. That means clients hire us when they need to understand how people, money, regulation, image, and disaster may collide in one ugly place. In other words, I make models for collapse. What Liu Changwen never noticed was that living beside someone who studies failure for a career makes deception difficult, but
Not impossible.
he borrowed from my work more often than he admitted. He would call it seeking my opinion. I called it late night conversation, somewhere between love and convenience. Those two things had become the same. He had asked me casually for my views on tenant displacement backlash, contractor, churn risk, neighborhood sentiment heat, maps, and phased publicity strategy. His project proposals grew sharper each quarter. I had not minded before. Couples share ideas. Couples help each other. But after the ribbon, every borrowed phrase in his desk began to look like fingerprints I had mistaken for intimacy. So I contacted Nikki, my oldest friend, and the most discreet intellectual property
Lawyer I knew.
I did not give her names at
First.
I only asked how one preserved authorship when work had been absorbed orally into someone else's presentation. She listened in silence until I was done, then asked one question.
Have you started?
Documenting everything. When I said yes, she exhaled and told me to start documenting as if a judge would someday read it. That afternoon, I exported version histories from my work laptop and my home machine, timestamped drafts,
Voice notes.
marked up
Diagrams.
messages where Liu Changwen had asked jokingly if he could steal my brain for a bid pitch. I also saved the recording from the car, where he called his colleague to provide the ready-made lie. He did not know my phone had started recording as soon as I opened the voice memo app to call my hands. The colleague's number led to Zhang Yulin, one of his deputy site managers, married, heavily mortgaged, recently promoted, a man with exactly enough need to agree to anything that sounded temporary. I did not contact Zhang Yulin. Men like him only get honest when their bosses are already drowning. Better to leave him untouched until the water rose. Meanwhile, Liu Changwen seemed relieved that the ribbon incident had faded. He kissed my forehead more. He invited me to dinner twice. In 1 week, he even suggested we look at wedding venues after the financing closed. If I had wanted melodrama, that would have been the moment to throw the wine in his face. Instead, I nodded and asked which month he thought would be best. He smiled, and for a second I saw the man I had once waited outside a campus library. For the man who had used a scholarship, money to buy me roasted sweet potatoes in
Winter.
memory is treacherous because it remains true even after the person changes. I went home and moved my savings into a separate trust account under my mother's emergency authorization. Not because I thought he could touch it directly, but because clarity feels like safety. We were not married, but we had planned our future as if that paperwork were only Delayed by logistics. I had already lent him money twice to bridge payroll timing when one municipal payment came late. Each time he ever paid me with interest because he hated looking dependent. That pride at least would be useful. The repayments meant every transfer had a clean record and a stated purpose. I asked my bank to send archive statements. I asked my email server to recover deleted attachments. I spent one Sunday reconstructing 2 years of quiet financial intimacy and discovering how often women subsidize male ambition while calling it support. By the end of that Sunday, I knew 3 things. First, he had stopped eating my money the month he met Zhang Yan. Second, his personal expenses had doubled even as he talked more often about pressure. Third, he had begun reimbursing dinners through project entertainment budgets that later corresponded with Zhang Yan's appearance in the reflected windows of restaurants and clubs. He was not only faithless, he was sloppy. Sloppy men are easiest to destroy because they think performance equals control. Once they have fooled one good woman, they begin to treat the world as a less attentive version of her. I needed to know whether Zhang Yan understood she was participating in a lie or believed she was the chosen future. That answer would determine whether she was collateral or partner. The answer arrived sooner than expected. Our firm was invited to a policy salon on adaptive renewal, and Zhang Yan was there, beside her older sister, Jiang Suyan, who ran risk review for the family office. I had met Suyan only twice before. She was the kind of woman who made waiters stand straighter without raising her voice. Jiang Mian, by contrast, glowed with effortless youth and confidence of someone never asked to enter through side doors. Lu Chengwen was also there, standing 2 groups away, speaking to a deputy mayor with just enough humility to appear unthreatening. When he saw me, surprise flashed and vanished so quickly, I almost admired it. He crossed the room with a wine glass and introduced Zhang Yan as if we were strangers whose circles had merely overlapped at the edges. Zhang Yan smiled at me, her face angelic and carefully blank. Miss He, she said, I have heard so much about your work. Lu Chengwen's eyes did not move, but I felt his attention sharpen like a blade against skin. I smiled back and said I had heard the same. Then I looked directly at the ribbon braided through the handle of Zhang Yan's handbag, not the one from the car. Number 9. She followed my gaze and touched it lightly. Cute, is not it? The foundation set was limited edition. My sister never lets me forget. I almost lost one. Lu Chengwen finally spoke and asked whether we met before. I answered for both of us. Not properly. I said, but your car certainly has better social range than you do. Zhang Yan laughed because she thought I was being witty. Lu Chengwen did not. An hour later, he cornered me near the washroom corridor and asked what that remark was supposed to mean. I said exactly what it sounded like and watched anger struggle against fear in his face. He tried charm first, then offense, then concern. When you're on, he said quietly, do not embarrass yourself by imagining things in the wrong room. Wrong room, I repeated. I almost asked whether the right room was 1708 at the meeting day. Instead, I only smiled and reminded him that rooms are never the problem. Doors are. That same night, Jiang Suyan sent me a short message through a mutual contact, coffee. Tomorrow, if convenient. No explanation. None was needed. Suyan arrived alone in a pale coat that made everyone else in the cafe look carelessly assembled. She did not order until after she had asked whether Lu Chengwen and I were together. When I said yes, her expression did not change, but a kind of administrative cold entered the space between us. She said her sister had described Lu Chengwen as emotionally entangled but effectively single. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was exquisite. Men do not merely cheat. They revise the moral architecture around the cheating until they resemble rescuers in their own mouths. Suyan folded her hands and asked whether I could prove he had concealed an ongoing relationship while seeking access to family office financing. I asked what standard of proof she preferred. Now she almost smiled. Documentation, she said. Nothing emotional. Nothing interpretive. Facts only. I told her facts were my favorite kind of revenge. That was the first time I allowed myself to call it revenge. Until then, I had named everything. Procedure, evidence, sequence, hygiene. Revenge sounded vulgar, but in Suyan's mouth, it sounded like procurement. Control. I did not hand her anything that morning. Instead, I asked one question of my own. If I brought facts with the Zhang family, protect its interests or its pride? She said both. Sometimes they are the same thing. By the time I left the cafe, the next phase had arranged itself. I would not fight in private where he could turn tenderness into a leverage. I would move the battle into domains he respected: capital, authorship, compliance, reputation. First, I prepared my professional escape hatch. For 2 years, I had been building a neighborhood sentiment forecasting model on nights and weekends, a tool our firm kept postponing because leadership thought it too complex for public clients. I polished the prototype, rewrote the interface, ran 3 new simulations, and booked time with my director. If Lu Chengwen had been feeding my thinking into his bids, I would stop being ambient intelligence in someone else's life and become visible value in my own. My director, to my surprise, said yes within 40 minutes. Not only yes, but why did you not show us this sooner? I almost answered. Honestly, because I was busy being useful at home. Instead, I told her I wanted it mature. Before presenting, she approved a pilot with 1 district redevelopment board and assigned me a small team. Visibility. Once. Delayed can arrive like weather breaking over a flat plane. Second, I formalized my loan history with Lu Chengwen. I sent him a polite message asking to consolidate past bridge transfers into one clean repayment memo for my tax planning. He grumbled but signed. He did not suspect anything because people rarely fear the habits they trained into. I had always been the orderly one. The woman with spreadsheets, categories, labels. He thought paperwork meant trust, not preparation for war. Third, I reconnected with Yusen, a data archivist from graduate school who now specialized in metadata for digital exhibits. Over noodles, he taught me how to preserve chain of custody for files without contaminating timestamps. Yusen asked almost nothing. Only at the end did he say, whoever hurt you has made a very technical mistake. I appreciated that. Sympathy is tolerable when wrapped in craft. A month passed. Lu Chengwen grew increasingly restless because the Zhang family's funding review kept stretching. He took more calls on balconies. He started showering immediately when he got home. I asked once whether work was that stressful. He said yes and pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair the way he used to when he wanted the world to disappear. For 1 weak second, I leaned back. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not let go of me, but his whole body listened elsewhere. I stepped away first. The message reflected in the black window behind him read, Suyan is asking questions. Did you tell her? He snapped the phone dark. Before I could see more, he looked up and said he needed to take a call from a subcontractor. After he left the room, I opened the notes app and added a line to weather. Panic in reflected glass. Sometimes a sentence is enough to keep you from becoming ridiculous. With sorrow. A week later, Zhang Yan contacted me directly. She asked if we could meet woman to woman. I agreed because confident girls raised in expensive houses often mistake confrontation for control, and I wanted to know which kind she was. She arrived in white linen and fragrance that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She did not sit until after I did a small dominance ritual. Noted. I expected denial, accusation, or some modern speech about complicated emotions. Instead, she asked whether Lu Chengwen still slept beside me. Her voice held more curiosity than shame. I told her that was an ugly question from a woman who claimed to be educated. She shrugged and said, educated women are simply given better words for the same instincts. Then she said something I did not expect. He told me you were brilliant but impossible. He said you turned every feeling into analysis, every future into a checklist, every argument into a briefing memo. He said he admired you and felt erased by you. I could have denied it. I could have defended my temperament to a stranger, wearing my life like a rumor. Instead, I laughed so hard I had to look away. Men always claim to feel erased when a woman can see them clearly. What they mean is that illusion becomes labor around her, and they resent the cost. I asked Zhang Yan whether she knew he still had keys to my apartment, meals in my refrigerator, a wedding folder in our shared cloud, and loan repayments scheduled through December. For the first time, her face moved. She said he had told her the practical separation was complicated. I asked whether she also believed his complications climbed into my bed and called my mother auntie at festivals. She stood too quickly, furious and embarrassed. Before leaving, she said, if you really wanted him, you would have fought sooner. That was when I understood she was not stupid, only young enough to confuse immediate desire with more legitimacy. I answered quietly, a man who needs 2 women to feel tall is already kneeling. She left without her tea. That evening, Johnson received the first packet from me. Not anonymous, not theatrical. A secure file transfer labeled review materials. Inside, the ribbon, inventory, navigation fossils, expense, patterns, loan memo, timeline, file author, histories, and a car audio. I excluded anything emotional. No diary, notes, no photographs of me crying in the kitchen. Susan asked for facts. I sent. The kind that survived fluorescent lights and legal review. Her reply was one sentence. Understood. Please preserve originals and be available.
Next Thursday.
I slept better than I had in 2 months. Next Thursday turned out to be the pre-approval session for the Jang family office. In 2 co-financing institutions, Liu Changwon believed he was attending to clarify minor concerns. In reality, he was entering an audit disguised as a meeting. I was not in the room. Suyan did not need me there yet, but Yusen later told me he had never seen metadata presented with the elegance of a blade being removed from silk. By evening, Liu Changwon's phone had exploded, with calls from his managing director, his deputy, his banker, and finally from me. He did not answer anyone until he called me back close to midnight. When I picked up, I heard his breathing before his voice.
What have you done? He asked.
Not with rage, with the hollow sound of a man recognizing architecture only after the floor tilts beneath him. I said I had submitted accurate materials to a party entitled to review them. He asked whether I had lost my mind. I said no, only my patience. He drove over immediately and banged on my door hard enough to wake the elderly couple next door. I let him in because I wanted witnesses in the hallway to hear my voice. Stay calm while his broke apart. He stood in my living room with rain on his coat and asked whether I understood what was at stake. Funding, jobs, years of work, his name, his future. I listened and thought how interesting it was that he had arrived at morality through financing. When he finally stopped, I asked whether he had thought about my future while teaching. Another woman to regard me as an obstacle. With legs, his mouth opened, then shut. He tried to pivot. Said the Jang family, exaggerated. Said nothing had really happened. Said he had been stupid, vain, flattered, cornered, tired, lonely, ambitious, human, men become boys only when their options narrow. I asked one question. Did you ever intend to tell me before securing their money? He looked at the floor. That was answer enough. I handed him the repayment memo and a preliminary cease and desist prepared by Anne. Kate. He stared at the second document and asked if I was truly insane enough to claim intellectual misappropriation between partners. Partners, I repeated. We are not partners. We were intimacy arranged around labor. I simply stopped donating mine. He left near dawn. Before going, he turned at the door and said, I always needed to. When? I answered that he had confused consequence with competition. Not everything that destroys you is trying to beat you. Some things are only refusing to carry you anymore. The following Monday, his managing director called me privately, not to accuse me something worse, to recruit me. Your framework is the most original thing. Attached to this bid, he said, if you are willing, we would like to discuss collaboration, independent of Wu Changwen. I almost admired the efficiency. Capital has no romance. It merely asks, we're alive. Wire is after the smoke clears. I told him. Any discussion would happen through my firm, not through men who missed their girlfriends for infrastructure. My director, when informed, laughed so hard. Coffee nearly came out her nose. By Wednesday, we had drafted a rival support page using my model openly, legally, visibly, with my name on the front page. That was the moment Liu Changwen ceased to be the center of the story. Not because I stopped hurting, but because I had moved from reaction to construction.
Revenge can
Be a bridge if you refuse to build only.
gallows.
John Mian, meanwhile, learned the cruel mathematics of families like hers. Her father did not scream. He reassigned staff, froze cards, canceled one trust, disbursement, and sent her abroad for 6
Weeks under the name of study.
To be loved by powerful parents is sometimes to be quietly removed from your own scandal. She texted me once from Zurich and wrote, he still says he loves me. I did not respond. Liu Changwen's project went into internal review. Entertainment reimbursements were audited. Zhang Yulin under questioning admitted he had lied on call at his boss's request. The service elevator logs from the Ningdi match dates he had billed as stakeholder dinners. His firm did not fire him immediately. Organizations built by men prefer slow suffocation to public blood. They suspended him from external negotiations, reassigned his client contact authority, and let the rumor mill do half the work. That should have been enough for me. It was not because I wanted pain for pain's sake, but because he still believed he could wait me out and emerge with dignity if he kept the wreckage private. So I accepted an invitation to speak at the City Renewal Forum where his firm had planned to showcase the project's revised direction. My session title was dry enough to induce sleep, sentiment modeling under compliance constraint. Liu Changwen was seated in the third row when I walked onto the stage. He looked thinner, sharper, as if sleeplessness had turned his face into an argument with itself. I spoke for 30 minutes about civic, trust, disclosure burdens, hidden volatility, in stakeholder alignment, and the cost of treating soft information as a private asset. Only he in that room understood every second meeting. During the Q&A, an academic asked how one safeguards knowledge when professionals carry insight across intimate and institutional spheres. Half the room smiled, politely thinking it abstract. Liu Changwen went perfectly still. I answered that every transfer leaves a trace if you bother to honor labor enough to name it. Unnamed work, I said, is where exploitation hides best inside families, teams, marriages, and cities. When the forum ended, several directors came over to ask about licensing my model for public consultation processes. One of them was from the financing consortium that had once courted Liu Changwen's firm. He congratulated me on an elegant framework and said their committee had decided to back the revised package to my firm instead. Over his shoulder, I saw Liu Changwen hear every word. People imagine triumph feels explosive. Mine felt almost gentle, like loosening last. Not in a dress he wore too long because everyone admired how composed he looked in it. He cornered me once more that evening in the service corridor behind the ballroom. No audience this time. No witnesses. Only bright gleaming lights and the smell of industrial soap. He asked whether I was happy now. I said happiness had very little to do with him these days, which wounded him more than anger would have. Then he said something truthful at last. He said he had loved the version of himself, reflected in my certainty and in Zhang Mian's admiration, and had mistaken both reflections for love itself. I nodded because that was probably the smartest thing he had said in months. Then I told him self-recognition is not romance. It is vanity with better lighting. He laughed once bitterly and asked whether there had ever been a version of this story where I forgave him. I thought about the campus library, the cheap sweet potatoes, the fever. He sat through beside me the way he once pressed my frozen hands into his coat pockets. Then I answered honestly. There had been many versions where I forgave a weaker sin. Not this one. Not rehearsed betrayal. Not strategic lying. Not the use of my mind as scaffolding while another woman was led through the house. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the hope in him was gone. Not dramatically. Simply gone, like a room after the electricity fails and you finally stop, expecting the lamp to flicker back. Winter came. Our legal disentanglement finished in stages. Loan repayment schedule. Mutual property withdrawal. Division of appliances so petty it would have been funny if the microwave had not once heated soup for both our mothers. I moved to a smaller apartment with excellent morning light and no corners that remembered his shoes. My mother helped me hang curtains and deliberately did not ask whether I was eating enough until after the rice had finished steaming. On New Year's Eve, she stood in my kitchen, chopping scallions and told me that elegant women do not collapse merely because men fail basic examinations. Then she handed me a plate and told me to stop looking tragic. My pilot project became a permanent unit. We named it Blue Thread Lab because every model begins with one line people underestimate. You then said it sounded poetic for a machine. Assisted public trust engine. I said poetry was only patterned under pressure. And Key drew up our expansion documents. My director became my partner. By spring, we were profitable enough to hire 4 analysts and a designer with violent opinions about topography. At some point, news of Zhang Yan filtered back through mutual acquaintances. She had returned from abroad, turned down 2 respectable sons of equally respectable families, and enrolled in a program on governance and ethics, which was either irony or growth. I never learned which. I did hear that when someone mentioned Liu Changwen's name at dinner once, she set down her chopsticks and asked to discuss literally anything else. That almost made me smile. Some educations are expensive because tuition comes after.
Illusion.
As for Liu Changwen, the city is large enough that one can disappear without leaving it. I heard he took a consultancy role in a smaller firm outside the central districts, far from flagship projects and public visibility. He sent exactly one email 6 months after everything ended. It contained no pleading, no poetry, no attempt at explanation, only an apology for having once believed that being understood entitled him to be excused. I read it twice and archived it in weather. Not because I intended to revisit it, but because history deserves complete records, especially when it finally learns grammar. The first time I saw him again was in early summer. I was leaving a symposium with a badge around my neck and a folder under my arm. He was across the street outside a modest office tower speaking into a phone. with the careful intensity of a man who could no longer avoid mistakes. He looked up at exactly the wrong moment.
We
Recognized each other in the same second.
No.
Dramatic halt, no trembling music, no. Catastrophic longing, only recognition. I crossed at the light because I refused to. Alter my route for ghosts. When I passed him, he stepped aside automatically to make room. That courtesy at least remained intact. He asked how my mother was. I said she had started painting peonies and criticizing the posture of television anchors. He almost smiled. Then he said he was glad. I told him I hoped his health was stable, because stress had always lived in his stomach before it reached his mouth. He nodded once, surprised that I remembered. Of course I remembered. Women do not forget what they once tried to save. The light changed. I could have kept standing there, excavating what remained. Instead, I said, take care, and continued walking. Halfway down the block, I realized my pulse had barely changed. Freedom is sometimes disappointingly quiet.
No trumpets.
No cinematic weather.
Just ah.
Body no longer waiting for its own humiliation. That autumn, our friend published a public report on civic confidence under opaque ear development practices. It was well received, quoted, debated, misread, praised, and attacked. In other words, it mattered. My editor friend, who had been following my work for years, suggested I turn the methodology and its hidden history into a book for women in negotiation heavy professions. Not a memoir, she said. Manual with blood under the polish. I thought of all the nights I had named my pain after neutral things so I could survive. Looking at it,
Weather.
dust, August. Perhaps there was another use for evidence. Once it stopped being a knife, perhaps it could become instruction. So I wrote in the mornings before work and on trains between districts. I wrote about how lies recruit witnesses, how money exposes desire, how calm is often mistaken for weakness by people who need drama to feel important. I wrote about the danger of donating, expertise without ownership, the seduction of being called exceptional while being used as infrastructure, and the fact that betrayal usually arrives long before proof does. The chapter readers responded to most was the simplest one. It was called If You Know.
You know enough to begin.
Not enough to accuse, maybe. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to start moving money, files, names, trust, and sleep. On the night, the finished manuscript went to print. I opened the folder one last time. Ribbons, timestamps, reflected, Windows signed memos, one cowardly email. Dozens of precise little shards. I did not feel rage anymore, only gratitude toward the woman I had been when my hands shook and I still chose to collect rather than collapse. I deleted nothing, but I moved the folder out of active storage into the deep archive, where finished storms go. Then I opened my apartment windows and let the night air in. There had been signs even before the ribbon. Signs I treated as ordinary wear in a long relationship. The way he started asking whether I was ever tired of planning everything. The way admiration curdled into complaint whenever my answer was practical. In college, he used to boast that my brain was the safest place he knew. Years later, he said the same thing like an accusation. Safety, to certain men, becomes suffocation. The moment it stops flattering their chaos. I remember one winter when he missed a scholarship deadline because his father was in the hospital. I filled out the forms, printed the documents, chased the department, stamped, and stood in line for him in sleet. When he won the extension, he kissed my frozen fingers one by one and swore he would never forget who kept his life from. Collapsing at the joints, promises made in hunger often die first when comfort arrives. He hated owing favors and adored receiving rescue. The contradiction amused me when we were poor. It looked different once he had enough success to call his dependence pride. And my labor personality, for our 5th anniversary, he gave me a silver drafting pencil because he said every empire starts as a line someone dares to draw. I kept that pencil for years in a
velvet sleeve.
After the ribbon, I found it in his study. Drawer beside restaurant invoices and a hotel matchbook. That small exile hurt more than the evidence around it. Sentiment, discarded without even noticing, is sometimes the true confession. 2 weeks before I sent Sugi the packet, Liu Changwen had invited my mother to dinner and insisted on driving her home because it was raining. She later told me he drove too fast and looked distracted at red lights. At the time, I only smiled and said he was busy. After everything surfaced, I kept thinking about my mother in the passenger seat, talking kindly to a man already, practicing how to divide space between worlds. She never asked why I had not told her sooner. Good mothers know that daughters often delay disclosure not because they are weak, but because they want one private chance to verify that their grief is real. The morning after his confrontation at my apartment, I found that he had transferred my half of the utility balance before sunrise and sent a message listing which kitchen items he had left behind. The list was absurdly meticulous. Rice, cooker, induction pan, 3 ceramic bowls, yellow soup ladle, citrus juicer. Even at the edge of collapse, he still wanted a record that proved he could behave correctly in narrow spaces. I replied only once, leave the plant by the west window. You are always overwatering it. He sent no answer, but when I got home that evening, the soil was finally dry enough to breathe. People like to imagine betrayal as heat, fever, lust, rage, combustion. In truth, much of it is administrative. Password changes, repayment terms, boxes, bought in the right size, service accounts, rerouted by polite emails. Perhaps that is why so many women endure it longer than they should. There's rarely one operatic moment. There are only many small clerical proofs that the future has already been updated without your consent. Jiang Suyan later told me the exact point at which her board lost all interest in preserving Liu Chengwen. It was not the affair, not even the hidden relationship. It was the instructed lie from a subordinate. Pride and hunger embarrasses institutions. Managed deception terrifies them. A man willing to recruit staff into domestic cover. Stories will eventually recruit them into procurement fictions too. After that, he stops being romantic and becomes expensive. Her wording was clinical, but I appreciated it. Women are too often asked to translate damage into feelings to be taken seriously. Sometimes the most merciful witness is the one who says simply, this is a governance problem. On the day his suspension became semi-public, inside the firm, one of his junior analysts sent me a message through a mutual contact. She thanked me, though we had never met. She wrote that every woman in the office had known Liu Chengwen liked to stand too close, to praise too softly, and each of them had wondered whether they were imagining the discomfort because he was so polished in meetings. I thought about that for hours. Betrayal rarely confines itself to the headline. Relationship. It leaks downward into atmospheres, into who feels safe speaking, into which smile is interpreted as mentorship, and which silence as consent. That realization changed the tone of my anger. I was no longer only defending my own past. I was helping name a pattern that would have been dismissed as charisma if no one had bothered to trace it. And he, of course, was delighted when I said that out loud. She told me righteous fury. Age is best when converted into structure. Then she sent me 3 more forms to sign, and a bill that made me laugh despite myself. During the weeks of legal exchanges, Liu Chengwen's mother called me twice. She cried the first time and asked whether men could not be foolish once and still come home. I told her homes are not laundries for character. The second time she did not cry. She only asked whether he had truly loved me. I answered in the only way I could. He loved. What loving me said about him until another story pleased him more. She thanked me for my honesty, and that was somehow sadder than tears. Family suffer. Secondary collapses when the person they defended turns out to have required translation all along. When Blue Thread Lab launched publicly, I almost did not attend the internal celebration. The idea of champagne after months of corrosion felt indecent. My team dragged me out anyway and put a paper crown on my head. Houston gave a toast about file integrity. My director gave one about stubborn women, changing municipal culture by refusing to be helpful in the shadows. I drank too much and laughed for the first clean time in a year. The next morning I found a voice memo on my phone for myself, recorded around midnight. In it I said, apparently very drunk, do not ever date a man who thinks access is proof of worth. I kept the memo. 6 months later, a junior consultant named Pei Luo joined our team. On her 3rd week, she knocked on my office door and asked whether I had time to review a contract. Problem that felt strange rather than wrong. That distinction impressed me. Strange rather than wrong is where trouble often begins. We spread the papers out on my table, and within 10 minutes it was clear a vendor had built an emotional dependency around routine exceptions. Pei Luo looked sick, not because the problem was catastrophic, but because she suddenly understood that she had been groomed to accept confusion as intimacy. I made tea and told her she was not stupid, only early. Then I taught her how to build a chronology, preserve attachments, and separate guilt from evidence. When she left, she turned back at the door and asked how I had learned to see things so clearly. I almost gave her the professional answer. Instead, I told the truth. Clarity is expensive, I said. Once you have paid for it, you should at least keep the receipt. The book came out in spring beneath the cover. The color of stormwater. Reviews called it unsentimental, razor sharp, and unexpectedly tender. I suspected the last adjective came from the places where I had written about women warning one another in time. At the first public event, a reader in the back asked whether I still believed in love. After all that research into self-deception, a leverage, and collapse, the room became so quiet I could hear someone unwrap a mint. I answered slowly because the honest reply deserved more than cleverness. Yes, I said, but I believe in love the way I believe in architecture now. Anything worth living inside must be built with load-bearing truth. Below the city carried on as usual. In different brilliant centers shouting. Scooters whining, windows lighting up one. After another light-coded signals, somewhere, a man was probably lying. Somewhere, a woman was already counting exits. I hoped, without knowing for whom, that she would remember this. The opposite of love is not hatred. It is clarity. Hatred keeps you orbiting. Clarity builds a new map and leaves. And if she happened to need a slogan sharp enough to fit on one line, I had one ready. Keep the receipts. Not because revenge is noble, but because memory deserves backup. When charm begins editing reality, that was the real ending, not the corridor. Not the forum. Not the collapse of the funding. Hageage or the silence of an old lover. The real ending was this. I no longer needed his confession to believe my own mind.
Once a woman reaches that shore, every road, after it belongs to her,